Every technology wave promised to solve the problems left behind by the last one. But here is the paradox nobody discusses openly. In the digital era, engineering teams have become one of the biggest source of very data problems. They are hired to fix faster pipelines built on unvalidated foundation. AI models trained on data that nobody has properly governed. Customer-facing products shipped before the governance layer even knew they existed. The question is not, should we build fast or govern carefully? The real question is, how do you get data engineering and governance to build together so that speed and trust are not in opposition? I'm Rahul, and today I'm sitting with Satya, Head of Data Governance at Superbank, one of Indonesia's fastest growing digital banks, backed by Grab and Kakao Bank. Satya has spent his career at the intersection of fast moving technology and rigorous data practices, from consumer tech and insurtech at Kuala to the heavily regulated world of digital banking. Today, we are talking about what it actually looks like when data engineering and governance stop pulling against each other and start creating something that lasts. Satya, welcome to the show.
Well, yeah, thank you. Thank you, Rahul. Thanks for having me, by the way. It's an honor to be invited in this podcast. Yeah.
Thanks, Satya, for coming to the show. You bring something genuinely rare to this conversation. You have governed data in real high pressure environments across consumer tech, insurance, and now one of the Southeast Asia's fastest scaling digital banks. Not from consulting tech, but from the inside. I think a lot of governance conversation jump too quickly into the regulation and miss the basics. So before we even get into OGK, UUPDP, in your experience, what does it mean to govern data well? Not the textbook answer, the real answer from someone who has to make it work in a company that is moving very fast.
All right. Before answering your questions, I think I might start with a story when I started the journey. And then in 2013, I started my career as consultant. So I implemented BI solutions, data warehousing, BI solutions. And back then, in 2013, BI is kind of luxurious solutions for a company to have because people are still focusing on implementing operational platform like ERP, budgeting planning. And back then, I kind of realized that data has been centralized in a team or tech team. Like IT has been responsible to do the heavy lift or implementing data solutions. So this kind of mindset goes along. But the advantage of doing this is IT has the source of truth. IT knows where the data belongs. IT knows where to take the data for CRM. They have all the domain knowledge. But I think it comes with the consequences of queuing. So whenever some other teams requesting the data and then they have to queue it into the IT request and something like that. And goes along the way that people needs the speed. And then centralized team becomes decentralized. The capability of processing, of utilizing data has been going into each of the domain. Maybe the QE is not longer the concern. Maybe now the consequences that comes with it is the risk of having dispute on numbers, dispute of having the conversations, who is the owners of this table. Everyone kind of admit that they are the users of the data, right? So nobody wants to be the owners. So I think they did this one, right? The governance came in, like assigning the correct owners and creating some kind of framework to not only to assign the owners, but what to do if data quality falls, what to do if the dispute of the metrics happens. And I think to answer your questions, right, how to implementing of data governance is not about establishing policies, establishing documents, but you need to educate people. It's not about the regulations. It's also about the best practice. It's about the consequences. It's about the impact. And also the most important part is about the values of why we do this. And I think talking about the actual governance, not only in the papers, right? Assigning data owners is one of the most important thing. And the second one, I think that helps the collaborations between each teams is the data catalog, data quality supervisions, and and other stuffs. Yeah.
That's very fair point, Satya. You put it there. And that actually bring to the discussion point what we're going to discuss today. So in your experience, and you touch upon the governance in terms of practical implementation, bringing the value out of it. So in your thought, what works in practice versus what looks good in a framework document?
Well, to be fair, right, the framework document has been there for a long time, right? It's not like I want to blame that. There could be some mistakes to be as the clarifications. I still follow the Dhamma principle and everything. Talking about data governance, right? I mean, the data governance can work efficiently if the infusions to the existing process works properly. So you force every items in the paper to be implemented in your organizations. It will create a huge tractions, a huge resistance within the organizations that will end up, the consequences will end up to the, no one will follow it. So I think what works in the actual word is, first one is to identify the low hanging fruits that you can solve. For example, I managed for all the papers, right? For all the items in the papers, the Dharma principles, I've seen a lot of deployment happens in the fast technology company, right? So maybe deployment that impacts data, maybe that one you want to touch first. How to govern this kind of deployment to minimize the risk of having data quality issues, of having new values that should be used by data analytics team in the filter, but because they're not aware, they don't use it, right? So these low-hanging fruits you have to be observed. And the second one, I think, assigning data responsibilities, in this case, data owners, data stewards. In the paper, stewards should be like the business domain. Most of the cases, maybe this can work like in a fast manner. So let me tell you this. Data stewards should be someone who understands data the most, and it will speed up if data stewards also understand the technical items or technical aspects of the data. So I talked previously that the dynamics have changed, like the gap between business and data has been closer along the way. So I think now then each domain have their own data analyst. Maybe these guys are the correct data stewards for you, right? Instead of assigning people who don't have technical aspects and their knowledge, so maybe assigning this kind of analyst as a data steward will speed up the process of infusions for data governance frameworks. I think these items are maybe the example of how actual words could be different with the ones in the paper. Yeah.
Yeah. It perfectly makes sense that yes, the framework will help you to understand at the larger what needs to be done. But in
Yes.
reality, you go by solving the real problem. And
Yes.
that's what you're also trying to point out. Yes, framework will help you to give a blueprint, but in reality, you need to design and make things to work for you and ultimately get the value out of the governance program. That's perfect. A nice answer. Thanks, Satya. So let's zoom it out. We talk about Dhamma. Dhamma is there for a long time, but in during 2 decades, we have seen a lot many compliance and regulation came into the picture.
Yeah.
So let's zoom out from the global perspective. My question is that, and especially for the audience, why does personal data protection as a principle exist across every major economy? You talk about GDPR in Europe, PDP in Singapore, CCP in California, and now you have UUPDP in Indonesia. What do you think? Why we need this kind of principles across all the major economies?
I think this PDP, GDPR, PDP Act from other countries share the same core values inside of regulations, right? I think the main or the biggest core values that is shared between the regulations is that the subject of the data is still the owner of the data. And I think for the simplest statements that I can give is, from my perspective, this regulations is not to regulate, this is not only to regulate if the subject of the data actually owns the data and they have the rights to ask anything about the data, not to share the data to anyone, or maybe not to use their data for any marketing campaigns or to delete the data. They have the rights for it. But I think these regulations also strengthen the brand in a way, the trust. So if you as a customers, what are the rights that you have as the data or data owners? So I think if the company complies to this, if the company has the proof that they can comply to this, it builds trust between the business or the brands with the customers. And it also helps the business to grow, right? When the trust is there, especially for us, like we are the bank. The bank business, it's not about money. It's not only about money, right? It's not about people who funds the money or lend the money from us, but it's about the trust. We want our customers trust if they put the money in the bank, in our bank, for example, so then the business can grow as well. And the customers got the transparency of what kind of data that we collect, what kind of activities that we use with their data. So I think the regulations is there for this, for the trust of the customers. Yeah.
It's perfectly put. Trust become a critical element when we share data. So let's narrow down to from global perspective to the Indonesia, because you're working in the industry in the region. How UUPDP and OJK, especially on digital banking, translate those global principles we talk about: minimization, purpose limitation, individual rights, and accountability. How this global principle translate for Indonesian specific laws into a specific local requirements.
Okay. From what I've seen, we have like, as to set a context, Indonesia have two or three or two, like I can talk about two regulators in the financial institutions, especially banks. We have like OJK, maybe in Singapore we call it MIS, Money Authority, and second one is Bank of Indonesia. Like both of the regulators actually regulates of how technology is actually used in a bank, and it is regulated how we store the data, how we process all the data in all the life cycle of the data. If you're talking about data, right? And also if you're talking about the tech, it should be like the locations of the tech, how secure the tech, the penetration test that you need to do, like to make sure that the systems, the data that is used by the bank is secure and can be trusted by the customers or to protect the customers' data, right? So if you're talking about data specifically, I think it translates to how a financial institutions can collect the customer's data. For example, consents needs to be there. And after you collected the data, then you store the data. How you identify, how the financial institutions, especially the bank, can identify if the data is actually PII, and how you manage the protections around it. And then who can access this data? So then you comes to access management and the rest, like retentions, deletions, right? And just this year, OJK, our OJK, Indonesian OJK, launched the new regulations. It is called PADK 1 2026. It is regulating how a bank should also manage the data quality. Way before, they actually regulated that a bank or financial institution should ensure the accuracy of the customer's data. But right now, like this year, they actually regulates the data quality dimensions into like about 6 data quality dimensions, like we know from DAMA as well. Like it's about completeness, validity, and plausibility. So this data quality dimensions just launched by this year. And I think I just want to ensure people understand the same way from my understanding that these regulations is there to, for data governance expert, I think it adds up a new stack of how you can convince the people to do what data governance needs to do. So for example, like way before, maybe data quality dimensions is only accuracy. So then we go to other sources to make sure a customer's data is accurate. But right now, validity, completeness is actually regulated. So what I can tell to people is, if you think about it, data protections, data quality, data governance, it's not only about the best practice, but there's consequences. There are consequences if you don't comply to this. For example, it could be operational risk. If you think about it, like some people from operations may say that this column, we use it as reconciliations columns. We use it daily basis is to reconcile things. And then some other teams say maybe they don't use it, so they don't think that this is critical. But way before the regulations is there, if something happens to these columns, what happened? The reconciliation team was shouting, right? Where the process will get disrupted. Maybe the reconciliation process will get delayed and it will impact other things, right? So operational risk is there. The second one, if maybe talking about data protections a little bit, that you failed to identify the PII, so then maybe data is leaking. So what happens? So reputational risk is also there. So I think by this year data quality came in and all the regulations adding up into the stack that when you don't do this, it's not only operational and reputational risk that you face, it's also compliance risk. So it is not only to translate the global regulations into the internal regulations, but it also, I think, to make people understand that this is not only about regulations anymore. Regulations is there for a reason, right? So what I believe, these regulations stack up as the additional items that data governance can use to convince people. And the second one, I think all of this, if you translate, if you create, see from the impacts what happens if you don't comply to this, then business will get damaged. So if you think about it, I think OJK regulations, Payday Pay, right, PDP Act is there to help business to be more sustainable. So I think the impacts on complying this is not about compliance risk, operational risk. It's about the sustainability of an organization or a bank. I think it translates to the how a bank could be more sustainable in the future by having this risk in place. Yeah.
And that's a excellent answer, Satya, because if I try to make an analogy, it is something regulation is are for us to benefit. Us means corporates, right?
Yeah.
Basically, regulations are the teacher who are trying to bring discipline among the students. Sometimes you need to swallow bitter pills, but ultimately that's the benefit of us and sustain in the market, manage the risk, and that's the way you articulated very nicely for our audience. And really appreciate. Thanks for that. So now it's time for us to move to the next segment where we're going to talk about the war room. The war room where we have different kind of weird stories coming from the world. This is where we get into what actually breaks and how quickly it can break. I want to open with one of the most extraordinary accidental data failure in the global bank history. So back in 2020, Citibank was processing a routine interest payment on a load tied to cosmetic company Revlon. Now, due to a flaw in their loan management software and a data entry oversight, the bank accidentally wired the full principal of the loan, which is 900 million US dollar, not the 7.8 million in interest. The entire outstanding principal sent to the dozens of Revlon's creditor in one transaction, just one transaction. When Citi asked for the money back, several creditors refused. And when it went to the court, a US federal court ruled in the creditor's favor and said funds cannot be recovered. Now, a tier one global bank, hundreds of compliance, control, governance policies, coverage, every conceivable risk they could have imagined, they've been controlling. And a $900 million loss because of a data entry error and a bad user interface. Right. Now, Satya, when you look at the story through the lens of someone who sits between the engineering velocity and governance accountability every single day, what do you see? How do you take this kind of incident?
Wow. To be fair, that's the ultimate horror story for all people in the world. I mean, especially the ones who is working in the banks. But from my perspective, I haven't looked into the detail of how the technically could this thing happen in a bank. But from my perspective is maybe this what creates what how segregations of responsibilities needs to be there in place. For example, it's not many people in a branch office can create a transactions above this per amount. So this threshold maybe needs to be created once it is absent. So then you enable people that shouldn't have the capability to process this amount of transactions, then they can do it. So I don't know if the protection is already there or no, but I think governance needs to be in place. It's not only about the access management that you can do this, but it's also how far you can do this. Maybe you can access the PII, but what kind of PII that you can access? Maybe the segregations of access needs to be in place to minimize the risk of this to happen. I think in Indonesia, there are a couple of more cases as well. So one state-owned bank actually collect the money from dormant account and then transfer it to fraudster. It happens. It could happen. But if there is a process that limits people or couple of teams to process this kind of transactions, these things can be minimized or avoided. But from my perspective, this Revlon or maybe this state-owned bank from Indonesia is a horror story of something that can happen to a bank. But I think from my perspective, it should be like the governance could be the blocker on this part. And maybe people hates this, but this what happens when you empower people that is not a correct people to be empowered. So they are overpowered by their access.
And they oversight and they haven't looked the simplest mistake can blow and create this kind of horror stories. So that pivot me to the question that what is the difference between the governance frameworks that catches operational failures in real time versus those that only surface problems weeks later in audit?
I think that is actually hit the head of the nail of this problem actually. So from what I can see, the governance, you cannot really implement governance as real time for the first time. It's a journey from what I believe. So what I've seen, regulations is actually there. And also for a bank, you got a team that actually analyze the risk. So many things that you need to prepare, or for this case, processing and transactions, it can be done. It can be done after this. It should be analyzed that there should be a risk of if many people can transact for a lot of amount of money. So this kind of risk could happen. So from what I see, real time is way better than the later. But to go to real time, I think you have to enable people. Like I mentioned to you before that in paper, it's not about the regulations or the best practices that is written in the paper, but you have to create your own processes. Maybe the analysis or the data quality check can be done after, but I think the best process is when you can validate the data upfront. So when the customer filled in the wrong data, then they get an alert and then they can fix it directly. Instead of you processing the wrong data and you follow the customers back to fix the data, right? So, but I think it's a journey. Maybe if the process is there, so the process needs to be in place before, the ownership needs to be in place before, and then you'll go to the check after the fact. So when you analyze and you see the raw mistakes or the validations required, so then you can create a request to be validated upfront. So I think it's part of the journey. It's not like compare which one is the best.
And it's also based on the assessment of the environment, what are the needs and other things.
Yes.
So we talked about this war story. Satya, now take us into a real moment from your own career where the gap between how fast engineering was moving and how mature the governance layer created a genuine crisis. What broke? Who felt it? What specifically changed as a result? So the audience, they want to hear from you a real story, a war story where you face a problem and how you solved it and how it's being felt. What was the result?
I see. I think I can actually share the experience from previous companies that I work with. It's not a really genuine crisis per se, but I work as a analyst before. So we got a request, like it was very fast. Like we have to develop something in hourly basis that manage the complaints from the customers. So actually the data that we process is to inform if the complaints is going to other places. For example, it comes from customer experience. Oh, customer experience can solve this. Also, it goes to ops. So then customer experience can answer to the customer, hey, it's now being handled by ops. So it's in hourly basis. And the governance issue was when the object was named, like, for example, like you have the abbreviations of a model, right? For example, like H. So that this is view and it is hourly basis. So there's assumptions from many people that, okay, VH should be refreshed by hourly basis, right? So we can use this data. Then we talk to many teams in the companies that, okay, the data is ready, the data is available, so you can use it in hourly basis. Customer experience, you don't have to worry. We can get you the data in hourly basis. You get the update of the data on hourly basis. And then we develop and then we do kick off, like huge kickoff, like it involves operations team, customer experience, and everyone in the big meeting that, okay, this is what we want to do. And then, okay, me as an analyst, I build the code and everything. And then, okay, I'm ready. Okay, then UAT phase. In the UAT phase, that we just realized the governance is not in place for this kind of view. So actually, the view is daily basis. So VH abbreviations is not according to the governance. Some engineers just, okay, I just want to get this data by daily basis without changing the name. So then be it, right? And then people who uses it, they cannot rely on the name itself. Like the data is not refreshing basically. So then it creates attractions is an issue with all the teams that involved in the project. So I think this is the crisis, right? I mean, there's a lot of things to do then. We need to fix the refresh. We need to check if the columns is still the same after the refresh. And we need to check if the data is actually real and a lot of other things. Then it delays the project and it delays the commitment from our customer experience to the customers. So then I think this is where when people kind of put assumptions of how data governance works or how the models is actually named like that, and then they can just change the refresh schedule and then without changing the name, and then it creates the crisis inside of the organization.
So basically, that confusion is because consumer they don't know about how going to consume it, this information. The naming conventions say it's supposed to update hourly, but engineer decide to do it daily because of ABC reason.
Yes.
And it create a confusion among the people who are going to use the data, and that bring another layer of data contract or different aspect of governance, that what is being agreed, what is being delivered, and if there is a change, there is a communication. That's a fantastic story, and I think everybody among us have different kind of or similar kind of a story. And that conclude our round. Now we're jumping into the exciting binary round.
Okay.
And this is the rapid fire round. So be ready, Satya. It is time for binary round. We're going to ask 5 or 6 questions, 30 seconds or less for each. No diplomatic hedging, no corporate careful answer ready, right? So you just have to quickly say A or B or yes or no, whatever it is. Okay? You ready? Okay, all right. So let's start. So in digital era, engineering teams, the biggest enablers of good data or the biggest source of data problems?
Enabler.
Enabler. Okay, perfect. Data governance, does it genuinely make engineering teams faster over time, or does it always slow them down first?
Slow down first. I have to make some kind of more explanation. Additional explanations is required.
You can make explanation, but answer has to be fast. So why so? Let's go into that.
So I think this kind of mindset, like I told you the story of 2013, and IT has been the centralized team that manages the data. And then so every problems that caused by this, it should be from IT, right? So I think for me, from what I've seen, tech should be the builder. Their responsibility is to build. So if they fail to build a good foundations of the data, it's not purely their mistake. Maybe no one actually tells them to build this. So I think the failure of data quality or data issues is not because of tech. It's because the company or the organizations failed to enable the engineering team to produce good data. So I think when you enable the engineers, good data will come. So that's what I've seen. Okay. So that's why I believe engineering is the enabler. All right. And the second questions, I think for new processes that is introduced, we want to enable engineer to produce the good data, right? More processes actually introduced, and more processes introduced, so then it slows down them, right? So I think from my perspective, slows down means they haven't adopted the new process that is introduced. Once it is introduced, I think it becomes the BAU, so it becomes a usual thing for the engineers to build it. So I think that's what my answer is about. Yeah.
Perfect. So let's move to the next question. Next couple of questions, rapid fire round. Answer has to be fast. Explanation, you can take time to explain it. So UPDP in Indonesia, will it really change how digital banks handles personal data, or will most organizations just update their privacy policy and carry on?
We'll change it.
Okay. Next, AI governance in banking, a real discipline that data teams are building seriously today, or still mostly a slide deck and a risk presentation?
Mostly still slide deck. I'm sorry for that.
All right. Do you have any explanation for these two questions?
PDP is seriously taken care by our ministry. So there are consequences if we don't comply to this. And even more that I told you about this, that it builds the trust between the brands and the customers. So for a business to be sustainable, so I think more people actually aware of this PDP Act. So more people are asking for the company to comply to this, like asking for their data, asking for the company not to share the data to anyone. So I believe that most banks or even most organizations will comply to this. The second one, AI governance, we're just in touch. We're just in a surface. I think the country is in a surface phase of utilizing AI. So I think AI governance is still very new in Indonesia. So I think right now it's still in the tech. Yeah.
Okay. Three more rapid fire
Okay.
question.
Okay.
And so centralized data governance or federated data governance?
Centralized.
Okay. When a data governance initiative fails inside a fast moving company, is the root cause a culture problem or a tooling problem?
Culture problem.
5 years from now, which digital bank, which digital bank wins in Southeast Asia is the one with the best engineering velocity or the one with the strongest data trust?
Stronger data trust.
Okay, you want to have an explanation for this
No
discussions.
explanation to that. It's
Okay,
obvious.
perfect, perfect. So that's conclude our rapid fire round. Now we're moving into our final segment. Is about the final mandate. You being such a great guest for this particular show, Satya. We talked about what governance look like in a practice, how global principles translate into local reality. We talk about PDP and OJK, and what breaks when engineering and governance are not aligned, right? So as we look ahead into 2026 and 2027, stakes are only going up. AI is going deeper into credit decision and fraud detection. OOPDP enforcement is tightening, and the banks that have not made their governance shift yet are going to feel it. So, in your experience, what is the most important shift that data governance leaders inside digital banks and fintech must make now, right now, not in a year?
I think, like I mentioned in the beginning, that the process, you have the informations of what is data governance, what builds the good data governance frameworks, right? So I think what is the most important part that the team can do right now is to identify the low hanging fruits, identify the most issues that happens in your organizations and put some frameworks around this. First is identify the most problematic issues in your organizations. The second one is, I think, for data governance or maybe the other governance team in the organizations to identify the ownership. Like the shift needs to happen. The data issues is no longer owned by centralized data team or IT team. Maybe it is owned by data owner. Like business needs to be responsible to this as well. Identifying critical data elements is not for IT job or data job, is for the business to assess it. So the shift needs to happen. The collaborations needs to happen. It's not about who makes mistake and who is responsible, like it's data or it's IT, right? It's about the collaborations of everyone to ensure data protections, data quality, data governance is in place. Also about data governance, data protections, I think many people kind of confused of why data governance have to do data cataloging, why we need to buy data cataloging tools, right? It's not only about to identify the definitions when you want to search definitions. No, it's about it closely related to data protection as well. If you think about it, data catalog contains the information of how is the classifications of the data. If it is PI, so it is PI. So it helps DPO to identify where the PI is stored and where the PI is processed. So the collaborations between DPO, data governance, along with all business owners tech will help the business to be sustainable and adaptive to new data solutions or AI solutions to come. I think that may be the best or important thing to do right now. Yeah.
What one or two advice you want to give it to the leaders, data leaders, in order to make sure they succeed in their journey about the governance, enablement, and bringing the value out of it? One of the top or two, three advice for leaders.
Data governance leaders advice.
Yeah.
I see. I think I've seen this. Like I've talked to some people as well about data governance, and I think the most problem is People understanding of how data governance works is to establish policies, is to establish regulations inside of the company. But it is not only that. Like I mentioned in the beginning, that if you focus on establishing policies, establishing regulations, and you enforce people to follow these regulations and rules, people will end up not following them. It will be very disruptive to the organizations until people will end up ignoring it. So I think the advice that maybe I can share along with my experience is first to identify the low hanging fruits, like I mentioned in the beginning, and infuse the process instead of creating a new process. So if you think about it, right, you mentioned, like, you talk about how fast the engineering is right now. And even many companies actually do that. Like many deployments happen in one day and many microservices owned by an organizations. Maybe 10 years ago, one organizations only have like one engineering team to build everything. But right now, no. We have microservices, one team to build this, A, B, C, and many deployments happen in one day. If you disrupt this with a new processes, new documents to submit by the engineers, people will end up ignoring it. So my advice is identify what would be the most important in terms of deployment. And instead of creating a new documents or new processes, maybe you can infuse to the existing processes, asking them to fill in the informations that you need. Classifications, definitions like data catalog, right? Instead of building a new documents for them to submit, if they have the PRD, TSD, maybe you infuse that. Maybe if they have deployment deck, infuse the process. So I think that's what my advice is. Yeah.
Perfect. Creating friction by having a new process is not going to solve problem, but to complementing the existing process for the ultimate benefit of everybody is the way.
That's a nice way.
Nicely put it by you also, Satya. So here we are close to the podcast. It's almost end of that, and really appreciate for your time. But before that, we talked about different paradigm shift, technology, and everything. Satya, I would like to ask on behalf of all the data governance leaders, engineering leaders, not just governance, listening today, who are trying to make this shift inside their own organization. You give advice about the not introducing new process, infuse the process. But on top of that, what is the one concrete action they can take this week to close the gap between where they are and where they need to be? One advice.
Okay. I think for engineering leaders and data governance leaders, I mentioned in the beginning that you guys are not the source of the problems, guys. So you guys are the enablers. So you understand the impact of having unstable system. The customers cannot transact, customers is failed to transfer money to someone else. You understand that. But you need to understand the impact of not having data governance also in place. What are the impacts? I tell you what, for data protections, if you don't put like segregations of access, maybe the case of Citibank can happen to you as well. That's the biggest impact that you can see. Data quality is not only about the operational process. Maybe some things in your banks have the problems with doing reconciliations and everything, but it's also compliance risk. So your government have these kind of regulations that require banks to report every month or every day or every week. So if you don't report it on time, so you got issues. And this kind of impact actually leads to the sustainability of your organization as well. So what I could say is understand the biggest, like the highest level of impact of not having these frameworks in place. The second one is, I think, try to focus on the low hanging fruits. Again, I say this, like, I know there are a lot of problems, but what are the problems that can be solved the fastest? So you're the leaders that you need to be able to identify this and then go for it. Every victory that you give or every victory that you get out of these issues will lead you to bigger victory ahead. So if you look at the hardest problems, I think the victory will not get to you as fast as possible, right? So if you look at the low hanging fruits, the victory is there. The tractions will get better around the team and it helps you to solve the bigger problems then. So I think that would be my advice. Yeah.
So, Satya, you bring exactly the kind of clarity that data teams in regulated, fast moving environment need and rarely find in a single conversation. Thanks for the having time with us. You are grounded, practical, honest about what really works and how it can help. So, where can our audience follow your thinking and connect with you? I will going to put the link details about yours. That will be helpful. So, I hope you will be available, accessible for the people who want to take advice from you.
Yes. Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
Perfect. So the best data teams in 2027 or remaining 2026 will not be the ones that govern the most, that we take abstract from Satya's thoughts. They will be the ones that made the right shift from reactive to proactive, from compliance as a cost to governance as a foundation for trust. I'm Rahul, and this is the Data Trust Blueprint. See you in the next episode. Thank you, Satya.
Thank you.